All right, today I would like to do something maybe just a bit different in that I'm going to start in Sketch and I'm going to translate some of these symbols from our design system into Figma components and outline just a bit of that process. So I have excerpted a few of the more complex components that I built in Sketch, and see how that turns out in Figma. All right, so we've got a table and we've got two modal windows, some variants of those, to use some Figma parlance there. So we've got, if we just take a look at Sketch, these are all the different types of variations of the table symbol that our team used. And I mean, you can tell that's quite a lengthy list. Today we're not going to create all of these because actually some of these in Sketch are sort of hack-ish to try to accomplish certain types of outcomes. In Figma, some of these are no longer necessary. So, but things that we might run into on the design end might be having something left or right aligned. Say if we've got dollar amounts in that would likely want to have their decimal points all aligned. Likewise, we might want to have our content centered. Say if we've just got a list of state abbreviations or zip codes or something where all the digits are exactly the same length, you can quickly browse that column for content. So now if we look at the modal windows, we've got a very simple modal window here that just has a title, subtitle, and ultimately you want to place some buttons in here. Now at the time that these were built, Sketch natively did not support things like auto layout in that. I would rely heavily upon some of the Anima plugin to handle some of those things, like placement of these buttons. So you can certainly make it much larger. You can change these buttons. If you want to make it a different type of button, I think you can even change that there. And you can see that resized. I think we can change this to... Right. And I think there are even some limitations with the way that it calculates symbols within symbols within symbols within symbols. So this nested cascading auto layout in Sketch is not always the most reliable. So I think there are some limitations with how you can even rename and resize some buttons before the alignment starts to become disaligned. Likewise, you can do things in here like turning on and off the banner, and then all the content reflows to fit that space. Okay, so that is essentially what we're going to look at today. I'll do that in two parts, the construction and translation part, but let's just take a quick peek at how one of these is composed. So knowing that we had all of these different types of symbols to choose from, the design team would have different requests. Oh, we need something for checkboxes. We need something justified right, or we need something with a select type of pattern pre-built. So those are all valid requests, by the way. That's not a complaint. But that resulted in all these different variations. Now today, I think we will look at starting with this and turn this into a Figma component. So take a look at the construction here. We can see now in Sketch, it handles the clipping of content. So anything that falls outside of the bounding box of the symbol, it used to have a behavior that it would basically just not show. Now, somewhere around Sketch 54 or so, they changed that behavior that anything outside the bounding box would still show. Now, the only way around that was to create a type of mask that would, so you can see this has got this little arrow here. So that's masked to this shape. So when we resize this component, we're really resizing this rectangle shape because that's our mask. Anything outside of this rectangle will be effectively hidden. So all of this content is connected to this rectangle, and anything outside of it just doesn't show. So that means, I'll just hop back here, that means, and I'm not sure if this will work or not, that if we resize here, see we can, all right, in our wireframe, for whatever reason, we only need one value, we need one row in this table, and that's something we can do with this symbol. Okay, so that is the overall hierarchy, the structure of this symbol. So within this symbol, we've got a background element, which is really meant to provide the zebra striping. And this may or may not show up on a video, but it's a very subtle effect. And sometimes users may want to swap this zebra striping. I will not describe exactly why, but there are occasional circumstances where that's desirable. So this background element is basically just controls the zebra striping. They can swap it to be even, odd, odd, even. We've got our text content, then we've got the header content here. And we've got the text, and we've got this little sorting widget, and then the overall grouping of it. So each one of these items, you can see, has got different types of resizing characteristics applied to it, and that all controls all of these together. The combination of all these things gets very complicated to manage. So if somebody comes to me with, oh, I need something for this and this and this, or I just need a simple tweak to this, that one change can actually have a butterfly effect on all of the other resizing bits, how the structure works, which really requires a lot of effort to go in and test and retest and make tweaks. So a simple change like that could actually take the better part of an afternoon, depending on the impact. So anyway, that's the overall structure here. So we'll focus on that. We'll create this symbol in Figma. In fact, I'm probably going to take and copy this just to show how that works. Copy it from Sketch, copy it and paste it into Figma, and then work with it from there. Sometimes it could be quicker to just recreate it from scratch in Figma. Let's say for a button, for example, would actually be quite quicker to just build from scratch in Figma as opposed to copy and pasting. Now, one of the things that you would benefit from copy and pasting is sometimes your styles, your colors, things like that, your typefaces and that will actually retain some of the settings. So if you've got a certain typeface or a certain color or sizing or things like that, a lot of times that can actually be retained when you paste it into Figma because that gets copy and pasted as an SVG value. Sometimes you do want to do it, sometimes you don't. Today I will copy and paste them mainly as a way to shortcut some of the styling efforts. So, all right, so knowing that, how do we get this into Figma, right? So we've already built this in Sketch. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just copy all of these things. So it looks like that's all copied. So I'm going to right click there and copy the SVG code. And once we've got that copied, let's hop over to Figma. And you can see I've already done some practice work here in preparation. Let's go ahead and because we will be building some new components, I like to separate the components from the actual layouts and wireframes and that. It's a practice I've picked up while using Sketch over the years and find the organization very, very helpful overall rather than trying to hunt down the master components. So you can see I've already actually built these. This will be our target. So you can, just to run through, let's take a look. The overall structure of our table components will include a header component, I'm not sure if we'll show this part today, but the other main component will be the actual rows. And you can see we've got justification for left, right, and center. And we've created variants for each of those that will ultimately combine into the larger table component and all of its variants there. Okay, so let's find a free space here just to see how that looks. So let's paste in, and you can see that the symbol from Sketch, when it pulls in, it actually looks quite respectable here. I mean, it's pretty accurate overall. I mean, you can see we've lost the background zebra stripe in that, but let's just take a look at the overall structure. And you can get a sense for the shenanigans that are required to build something like this in Sketch. So you can see we've got quite a few nested groups of symbols and that. And to be honest, a lot of these groupings are necessary for all of the resizing and that to work correctly in Sketch whether you're resizing horizontally, vertically, etc. Having all these different groups combined with the overrides in that. So you want to have different colored backgrounds, different colored icons, different type of justifications and that. All of these different groupings were necessary to have nested symbols and that to just make all that work correctly. Now, let's try doing this in Figma, right? So I'm actually just going to ungroup as many of these as I possibly can just to simplify these. And our background. So let's ungroup that. Ungroup that. All right, so these are actually the background colors. Right. So I think what I'd like to do to build this is have a row component that I can just repeat. Now in Sketch, one of these would look like, so obviously we had different colored backgrounds in that, but we're just going to stick with gray and white today. But to do that, we'd have to have a rectangle and have a nested symbol on top of that to provide an override and group that and nest it into a larger symbol on that. So we're not going to do that today. So let's just pull this out. That is our text, and you can see it did retain the typeface and size and all that, and even the color. That's great. So let's go ahead and pull that out. Let's also take a brief look at the sizing. So that'll be 160 by 40. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is create a frame, right? Let's just try to get it to close to 160 by 40 as we can there. All right, so that's going to be the background of our component. And into that, let's paste our text. Okay, now my Figma I've set up because most of my design systems that I build are based on the root number 16. I like to build my design systems on very flexible number systems, and 16 is actually, I think, more flexible than 8. A lot of people do an 8-point grid. I have what I call a base 16 design system that uses the number 16 for everything. That makes it easy for front-end developers to build around the REM measurement. Okay, so I've actually got my Figma set up to the arrow keys to move in increments of 8. So Shift plus right arrow jumps 8 to the right. Okay, and so I've basically got these two pieces centered where I want them vertically. Okay, so we will do Shift A, which is also the same thing as adding an auto layout here. Okay, now that's not exactly what I want, so let's drag this back out to 160. Let's change this text to also not reflow that way. I'm just going to drop this again. Shift plus down arrow will drop me down by 8. So now I've got a nice box here. So this text will never run quite up against that boundary there. Okay, so I want that to fill this container, the horizontal scaling. And let's see, background. I think I've actually already set up some colors here as some preparation here. So I'm going to preset all of these. It's a very good habit to have as many of these things preset by your design system before you're building components. All right, so we basically got one row here, right? Now let's go ahead and make a component out of that. I'm just going to call this table component row. Row, because I might have another name there already in this file. Okay, it's a bit long, but we'll work with it. Okay. All right, so we've done our row. Now we could at this point start making variants in that. I'm actually going to start building the header part. So we've got this, it's just a plain group. And I don't know that this is necessarily doing us any favors with all this nested structure here. Again, a lot of this grouping and that was mainly for the benefit of Sketch. You have to do all sorts of extra tricks and that to sometimes get your components to resize and work correctly to have the right overrides and that. So let's see, we also do not need that there. So we've got just this plain group. I'm actually going to ungroup these. That is on Mac, Command Shift G. And Shift A, again, will provide me an auto layout. Okay, so that looks a bit odd there. So let's adjust our settings. I want that to be left justified, but vertically centered. Okay, and the spacing of 8, again, 8 is a very nice number for a base 16 system. That's just 0.5 REM. All right, so that is our primary header element here. So I'm going to copy that and create another frame. Again, this will be 160. I think actually this header part here is, if I remember from memory, I think it was about 29 or so. We can actually just make it 32. That's 2 REM. That's a nice round number for our design system. And let's paste that in there. Again, so that's vertically centered. We'll do that there. And here we should be fine. I don't know that we necessarily need an auto layout here, but let's just leave that as it is for now. Let's create a symbol out of that and name it similarly table component / header test. Okay, so we've got 2 parts here. We're actually very close to completing this. All right, let's start constructing the next part, which this frame is 160 by 231. That's interesting. Okay, I'm actually less concerned with the height as I am with the width. Right, so let's do 160 wide again. 160 again, that's 10 REM. That's 10 times the base number of 16. So that's a nice usable number. And let's just go ahead and in our assets, table component, all right, so the singular version, not the plural. So you can see in my test, I also made a header and a row there. Let's go ahead and put this into our frame here. Did it land inside? It looks like it did. Okay, wonderful. Okay, let's snap that right to the top there. Now, one of the things that's going to be important for, again, resizing components is playing with the constraints here, of the resizing. So we do want it set to affixed to the top and to the left, but because we also want it, if we want to resize it horizontally, we want it to stretch in some manner to the left and right. So if we attach the left and right boundaries there, you can see that stretched all the way out there. Okay, wonderful. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy this line and I'll just actually paste it straight in here. And that comes in quite nice. All right, wonderful. Okay, and we'll also set the constraints here. And we want that to also stretch left and right when we resize it, and then also to not move. Actually, that's just to demonstrate what happens if we don't set that to top. This line should sort of nudge up and down as we resize this. See, and that's not desirable. We want that line to be snug against the underside of that header. So select that, affix that to the top, and now when we resize, it does not move. Okay, all right, now we need to place this row in here. There we are. Fix that there. And I'm actually going to duplicate a couple of these then. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we've got a little bit of extra space here. Let's adjust that. Okay, now in our design system, our zebra striping, and I'm just going to set this background. A nice shortcut is to select the items you want, and rather than adjust them here, which you can do, you can just take a look at, out of everything selected, right, I want that white background to be something else. Now, I've already created a background, a style, a color in our system in Figma here. So we'll choose that background color. There we have it. All right. Now, one of the things that I would like our designers to be able to do is to have, let's say we even want to have more than 5 rows. Maybe we want to have 7 or 8. So I'm actually going to, I'll just add a couple more in there. So now we'll have 7. But by default, let's just show 5. But we'll have 7, just in case. All right, so that snaps right there. And the reason you can't see them is this, under the design tab, this clip content has been selected. So that'll hide all that by default. But as they place this, if they want to drag it a bit longer, they can see extra rows. They can play with those if they like. Okay, but for the time being, let's look at all of them. Now, what I'm going to do with these is I'm actually going to create an auto layout group of these. Again, and that, let's take a look at our layers here. So right now, they're just sort of a loose collection of these component instances. And let's hit Shift A, or auto layout. And you can see that grouped them all together, right? So those are all grouped. Now, what we want is that to be a vertical. We want no spacing between them. And let's fix that to the top left. Perfect. Okay, however, the larger group, I think we do want to have some constraints here, right? We want that not to be hugged to the contents. And I'll show you why. So if we resize this, I don't believe the rows will slide with us. I think they'll stay the same size. And they do. And that's not what we want, right? We want those backgrounds to move with us as we resize. So to do that, we will change it from hug to fixed. And then again, we will affix pins to the left and right side there. So now if we resize this, it still doesn't do it. All right, to troubleshoot that, let's go ahead and take a look at all of these symbols inside here. Let's change that to fill container. See what that does for us. There we go. All right. So not quite as fussy as Sketch. I mean, we've come quite a far distance here in a very short time compared to Sketch. So we've got components that have multiple rows that resize and that. Okay, so I'm going to go back and reduce that down to 5. And let's go ahead and create a component from this. I'll just call this table test, because I think I've already got a collection of them, table test, and let's just call this left. And well, yeah, we'll just leave it left for now. I don't think we'll build the table filters today. Okay, so there we have that, right? Now, something we can do here as a shortcut, now, rather than building all 3 of these variants, let's just do two of them. Okay, so an easy way to do this is to just create a variant right here. And that'll create a variant group, right? So what I will want to do here, this one's just called, let's take a look here, property one. We'll just say justification. Justification, that is our first property. And the first one, let's call that left. And the other one, let's call right. That's going to be super simple. You won't even believe how simple this is. All right, so zoom in a bit. So this is the left justified. That's correct. Now we want this one to be right justified. This is so simple you won't even believe it. So you got your text selected. Go down here and simply do that. That's it. You're done. That's really it. All right. And then just to show you how super simple this is, let's create one more variant. Just because it is this quick, really. Now we create a center one. Let's rename that to center. All right, and we'll basically do the same thing here. Now I'm curious whether or not this will join up. I doubt it. All right, so let's see here. We've got property one. I just want to get these organized correctly. So again, we'll say justification. This one will be left. And we shall make this one right. This one might be just slightly fussier. So we want to have this, instead of affixed to the left, we want that affixed to the right. Okay. And we'll pop that over shift left arrow. It jumps by 8. So we get our padding in that correct. So now it's affixed to the right hand side. And we should be good to go. Actually, let's double check. Okay, that will also work from the right to left. And if we want to be super thorough here, let's go ahead and make this centered one as well. So we want this group, I'll just center that in the middle here. And we want that to be horizontally centered. All right, there we are. Okay, so in order to make the table then, we've already made a component. Let's just make another variant. Okay, and this one, property one, will be justification. First one shall be left. This one shall be right. This will be super easy. Just watch this. Changes to right. Come in here. We'll select all of these. So even the ones that you can't see, those we shall make right. I don't remember. Did we name this one? I don't know if we named this one. We did not. All right. Thinking ahead here just a bit. All right. And so then let's create one more variant. Zoom. Do it. There we go. Zoom in a bit. All right. So this is really this easy. Go ahead and change this to center. Same thing with all these. Make them centered. And there we have it. Now, if I jump over to the layout, let's try to place our table test. Table test. Let's just drag that in here. Let's see if this works. Zoom in just a bit further here. So our resizing works there. We can see those extra lines there. That's great. Okay. Now let's see what happens if we want to change this to the right justified. Brilliant. And we didn't name that correctly, but I know that's centered, right? All right. So we can see all of that works. Now, just to test this, test title header long. All right. Now, I'm not going to try to exceed this. We can do plenty more to provide some extra quality of life enhancements in that. To our end users, as far as tweaking the, what is locked and what's not, because, as you can see here, I can come in here and I can select that line. And that's probably something that would get in the way of a UX designer trying to make the wireframe. So we might want to go into our components here, and I think we can actually go to our root elements here. So I definitely want to turn this off. I don't want anyone clicking on that, right? Same as this one, and this one as well. So that should disallow people to select that, so they will be more likely to click on the header, which is something they will want to play with rather than these other elements. Likewise, let's go ahead and lock, say, this and this. These are things that when you're building components for other people to use, if you can think ahead just a bit to how people would be interacting with these components. So thinking about, all right, well, if they're going to click an item, what are the overrides that they'll have access to? What is going to get in the way? What can you do to minimize the number of clicks and whatnot that your designers will be needing to do in order to complete their work? All right, so now you can see I can no longer select that widget or that line. So, but I can still select the text in that. So there we are. So that is a table component moved from Sketch to Figma. The next thing that we will look at today is the modal windows. Now, in Sketch, our design system actually defined a number of different modal sizes based on the number of fields that would be present in that particular screen or layout. So, for example, if you only had something capturing, say, an email address or something, you wouldn't want necessarily a great big window covering the entire screen. You would just want something quite petite, right, that would just house that single field and then a button to accept it. So we offered a number of sizes. Our layout used 12 bootstrap columns. So we provided 3 sizes, really, a small, medium, and large. And we even defined, if you've got 1 to 4 fields that you want to show, they'll all just be vertically stacked, quite simple. So it would be a narrow window. If you've got more than 4, but less than 9, so 4 to 8 fields, you can have a slightly larger window. Well, I'll just pop it up in here. You can see it's a bit larger there. Or if you've got more than 8, so 9 plus, that's really when you'd want to basically cover the entire screen with a modal, right? So here you would have something, and these are all preset to match our design system. So everybody's using the same number of columns, the same widths, the same artboard sizes and that to build against. So we defined these just for consistency in producing wireframes and that. All right, so today we will look at recreating these 2 modal types. Really, we're going to focus on this one on the right because it's just a bit more complex. But the general concept here is we have a window, we've got a title, which we've defined as an H2 tag in our system, and then that's basically to define the overall action being taken. So we generally describe that as a verb plus some noun, and then if you want to be more specific about what you're doing with that action, you can put that here. So, for example, you might say, add mobile phone number or something to somebody's profile, add a new mobile phone or something. So you might have just 1 or 2 fields here. So you might say, add data. And then more specifically, you could say mobile phone number, something to that effect, if you wanted to. So in general, we would have this title and then something more specific about that action. And then put your fields here and then a button. Other times we have, say, for validation purposes and that, you might want to have a banner or some type of information or warning or some type of alert at the top. Is actually quite common in our design system. So, and in our wireframes, we might want to illustrate certain circumstances for the developers, for the BAs, for the clients, for QA. So we can illustrate that for them, and then also provide guidance to the developers, of course, so they can take these scenarios into account when they're developing. So let's focus on building this one today. We're actually going to improve on this a bit when we get this into Figma. But things you can do with this type of symbol in Sketch is, say we don't want to show this banner message, we don't want an alert here, turn that off, and all the other items reposition accordingly. Now, if this were some type of a wizard pattern where you're doing step by step, you might want to fill that out. We're going to clear that out for now, or you can provide anything you want in there. Now, how did I build this? I relied very heavily on the Anima toolkit to provide these auto layout functionalities before Sketch had some of those things built into it natively. Let's take a look at some of the symbols here. Zoom in right here. Okay, so how is this created? Let's take a look at the hierarchy and structure of everything. See, we've got a bunch of nested groups and nested symbols and all that to handle the different color overrides and all that business. Again, this is greatly simplified in Figma in order to create these same effects. So we can see at the top here the overall grouping. Again, a lot of that is to provide the resizing constraints here. Inside there, we've got a stacked group. So this is a vertically stacked group. You know, you turn that banner message off, all the rest of these things will hop up into that space. They'll just nudge back up to that vacancy. But inside there, we've got our banner, which is in and of itself its own separate symbol in the system. We've just borrowed that for use here. All right, now one of the trickier parts to building this was getting these buttons to not only auto resize and that, because the buttons in and of themselves are auto resize. They're sort of these auto magic things where you type in them and they resize automatically, right? But then to have a group of them, you change the label in one and it moves the position of the other, but they're also, as a group, stuck down in the right-hand corner. So if you resize the window, it keeps that same margin and padding consistently. That was actually the most complex part of building this in Sketch, just because of all these different types of resizing constraints, and that made it just a real journey, I'll put it politely. Although I think it has been simplified as the software has matured, but a couple of years back when the software was less mature, this was quite a difficult process. But as you can see, we've got one of those auto layout groups here, and that is to provide a horizontal, you can see here, horizontal from right to left. So anything that moves here will adjust and push to the left as it resizes, which is handy. And then the positioning itself is pinned to the bottom right, and I think there might even be more right. I assigned some specific values to that, so it's always 2 REM, 16 times 2 REM from the base and the right-hand side. And of course, you've got these buttons. Like I said, these are auto resizing buttons. You change the label and the padding and everything around them changes. So all of these things, once you started getting nested layers of auto layout in Sketch, something about, I think once you get 2 or 3 layers deep of having, things automatically resize, things started getting unpredictable. Not always working correctly. Sometimes your symbols might jump around a bit. If you resize it, they might jump off the artboard altogether. So it was a real challenge to get this correct. So it required a lot of testing, a lot of tweaking, and a lot of, like I said, a lot of shenanigans and grouping and all that to work correctly. So that's the basic structure in Sketch. Now, what we can do, I will try to group this from start to back if I can. It looks like that's all one group. So again, I will copy the SVG code. If you just copy into Figma, you'll get basically an image, just a flat image, and that's not really very useful in most cases. So in this case, let's go ahead and, because I want to build a component, let's do that over here. So it's not perfect. It's not perfect because you remember we do have some nested symbols here, so it didn't quite capture the background here, but I think we'll find that the background color is there. It's just masked out, and that is a product of the SVG code that we copied. But by and large, it's all there. Let's see what happens if we resize it. Not great. I mean, even those buttons are quite a bit different, right? So a lot of these shapes are actually, even in Sketch, you can define them as just a rectangle with the border radius. So you resize that rectangle, that curve of the border maintains its shape. Now, however, if we look here, you can see that's just a plain vector image. And so this rounded edge should stretch and become very unattractive, right? That's not cool. And part of the reason for that is, it doesn't convert that same rectangle border radius. It basically just copies it as a vector image, so it doesn't maintain that border radius or anything. And it also has a mask on it. You sort of saw that it disappeared here as we resized it. Okay, so I think the first thing we'll do, let's take a look at the size here. So it's 416. That's basically in our design system, that is 4 bootstrap columns plus the gutters between them equals 416. So I would like to create a new box, and let's make sure that's 416. There we are. Brilliant. Okay. Okay, so the first thing that we can do, and you can actually see that this looks quite good already. I mean, it retained our font and all that, so I'm just actually going to copy and paste that in here, right? So shift plus 1, 2, 3, 4, that is 8 times 4 increments by the arrow, and then that equals 2 rem, so that's our padding. And let's even do the same thing here. Paste that in there, because that's retained the color and everything. So, but I happen to know I've already created that color in here as a standard, so I'm just going to change that. All right, breadcrumbs, let's actually not deal with that today. That's just one extra step that we don't necessarily need today. So, however, we will need these buttons. So let's take a peek here. We've got our text, and we've got the color and the size and all that. That is fine. So let's copy that. And I'm just going to paste it here. Again, this is slightly messy, but we'll get there. Bear with me. So I'm going to create a new frame. I'm going to put that inside here. So that is centered. You can't see anything just yet. So let's go ahead and change the background of this frame. That, I would like that border radius back as a live border radius. So this shape now, as you resize it, maintains that border radius, right? Okay, so now what we need to do is create a auto layout. So what that will do is make the button, as you resize that text, if you want to change the label or something, it will resize the button around it. Okay, so let's see here. Really, we want to focus here. Let's center and center that. So I happen to know that our padding in that was, on the top and bottom, was 0.5 rem. So 16 times 0.5 is 8. 8. Left and right is 0.75. So 16 times 0.75, 75% of 16 is 12. See, and this is exactly why I love the number 16. And it's very easy to use, right? Okay, so I think by and large, that's done. We're basically done with this button. So let's make a component out of that. I'm going to call that button test default, maybe primary is better. Okay, and then I do want to make one variant here. Now, for our test today, we could very well get by with without making these components in that and just making plain buttons here. But I'm showing you my actual process if I were to build these components from scratch and make these, usable and forward thinking. So ideally, we would want to make these proper components that can be recycled and reused elsewhere. That if we want to put them in multiple components, we can just go back to the source, that source button, for example, make some tweaks to that if necessary, and then that just propagates out to all of the other symbols that reference it. So change the button in one place, all of the components that use that button automatically receive those updates to that button. So it's that type of recursive thought process and whatnot that makes these design systems so efficient and so usable over time. So let's create a new variant of this. Let's make that secondary button, that cancel button. Okay, so here we are. I want that text to be a different color. Let's just make that black for now. Our background, let's make the background white. I think this time we should have a stroke, I think. Let's make that color. I think we're actually done. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's basically it. We can probably change this color if we want that to be a little bit more accurate. Something along those lines. But okay, so let's just make sure this is named correctly. Let's call this secondary button. So cancel buttons, reset, things like that. We've got a secondary style that's visibly different, not just a color swap. Okay. And then finally, let's take a look what happened here. Why is this so different? Let's take a look at the overall structure here of this, and let's ungroup a few of these things and see what happens. So we are now down to this group here. I want to take a look here. All right, so we've got this mask in this rectangle, right? I want to remove this and remove that. All right, here's our color. All right, so we do have a color assigned here. I would like to ungroup. There we go. Brilliant. However, you can see it has not retained our shape there. So let's go ahead and add border radius back. And again, in CSS, this would be defined as 0.25 rem border radius. So again, very nice, simple measurement. Right, this is not correct, robotic medium. This should be italicized. Okay, so we basically have this, and here, in fact, we might be able to get rid of this altogether, this rectangle. So I'm actually just going to copy that text into here. Right, and then let's make that auto resize frame, move that there. I believe the spacing here looks like it's about 1 rem, so let's center that vertically and bump that up both sides. However, we want this to extend, so we want that to come in 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this side, we want that to come in by 2 rem, or 32 pixels. Okay, now this also, let's set this minus 16. So that is all set correctly. Okay, now we want this text to wrap this way, right? We want that to fill the container. We want this to hug the left and right sides and the top. But we are missing a background, so let's go ahead and apply that color. That is horribly overpowering. So let's detach that color, drop it down to, I think it's 22%. And make that a quarter radius. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, so that is all set. Now let's set these to an auto layout as well. So if we turn that banner off, the head and the subhead will shift upwards. So let's create an auto layout of these 3 items. We want those to be vertical, and we want the spacing to be 52 between them. And that looks right. However, I think we need to adjust the sizing here. So right now this is auto. See, this is set to 28. I just want to make this the exact size of the type size, because otherwise it's going to do some awkward padding here between the objects. So let's set that to 32. Now we know that the spacing is exactly 2 rem between all of these items, and that is correct. Okay, and now if we try resizing this, nothing yet, because we need to then define the resizing of our auto layout group, so left and right. This should also move that way. This should also move that way, so it has an outer limit. Now let's see what happens if we resize. Still nothing yet. Interesting. Okay. Let's see why that is. Fill a container. Come to the H2. We want that to fill the container. And then what happened here? Oh, that's also fixed with. So let's fill the container there. All right. There we are. Brilliant. Okay. So let's set that back to 416. That's the size we really want. Okay. So we've actually done quite a bit of that work already. However, this looks maybe not quite right. That's actually going to bother me. Let's bump that up to 16 and this up to 16 as well. That looks better. I think that is closer. In fact, it looks like there might be just a bit more spacing here. It might be more than 16 padding on the left and right. Let's see if that is true. All right, that actually looks pretty close. I think we're doing well. All right, so now what do we need to do? We would like to add buttons here. So let's got our button test. Let's drag those inside here. And I'm going to create another one to the left of it and set that one to secondary. Change its label to cancel. Want all of our windows to have a way to opt out of them. Sometimes people will put X buttons or things up in the corner of the viewport, or maybe up in the right-hand corner, but I find that very unintuitive. If I see a button down here to perform an action, I don't want to have to look elsewhere for buttons to do other actions. I want them all grouped together, and that is a usability concern that we've picked up over the years. I've learned that the hard way. All right, so we want these to be an auto layout group. We want it to be horizontal. We want the spacing between them to be 2 rem, and we want this to be from the right-hand side. So if you change any of the labels, it will move from right to left. Now, so this, we want this to be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 by the arrow key and shift. And rather than top left, let's make this bottom and right. So let's see what happens if we, oh, that's beautiful. That is a beautiful thing. What happens if we change this to submit? Brilliant. All right, so that is looking great. Now, one final thing that we could do, and I find this very handy, something that is not necessary for the standard modal, that was just meant to be small and vertical and not meant to be resized horizontally. These can often be changed both horizontally and vertically. So in order to provide an extra guide to the designers as they resize things, if they want to resize them according to a certain layout grid or something like that, we can actually provide in Figma, we can do that within the component itself. So let's call this modal test and main or something. There we go. All right. So we've done that, but we want to add a layout grid, right? And not an actual grid. Let's do columns. And I want to actually reduce that just a bit. That's a bit overwhelming, that red color for me. I like something just a bit more subtle, I think. All right, so we happen to know that this particular modal is 4 columns wide. So 416 pixels wide we started with. That is 4 of our bootstrap columns, plus its gutters of 2 rem between them. So I know that's a lot of numbers to just hear and listen to on a video, but let's see what that looks like in practice here. So we want 4 columns, right? We do not want them to stretch. We want them to come from the left. And we want the width to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our columns are now 4 rem wide. Our gutter, we want that to be 2 rem. Now, actually, we want this to be 12. There we go. Right, 12. So, however, we want to offset that by 32 because we know that this modal actually stretches outside the leftmost a bit, so it stretches into the gutter just a bit. So let's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when the users see this, they will be able to judge how wide the window is. So let's go ahead and in our layouts place, find that one that we just made, modal test, drag that out here. All right, looks quite similar to the one that I had built before. Now let's see what happens if we play around with it. All right, that all resizes correctly. We tested the buttons earlier. Let's turn off the banner if we can. This one right here. And all that slides right up to where it should be. That looks like it may not be in the right place. Let's double check. Yeah, that doesn't look like the spacing is quite right. Let's hop back to our master here. Our frame, that's the problem right there. I'm not down far enough. 2, 3, 4. All right, so we're 32 in from the left and the top. Let's hop back to our layouts. And there we can see that looks right. So let's go ahead and turn this off. And it all slides right up into place. Brilliant. Okay, now if I were building a wireframe, what happens if I want to add a bunch of fields to this? Right, I would want to resize this. Well, now we can see we can go all the way up to our maximum of, this design system had 12 columns, so you could literally make it this wide as a maximum. And you can stretch this as high as you like. And there you have it. So we've now produced a modal that is quite flexible, provides a lot of different features and flexibilities to our users. We can further refine this as a component by, again, locking certain elements within the main component to simplify what things people are clicking on. So that can also come in handy if, for example, you've created, like we did, talked about earlier, we've got that delete confirmation. Say you want to have this message always be the same. So now as a component, right, we want this button for a delete confirmation. We always want this button to be red. We always want that to say delete. We always want this title to be this. We always want this alert banner to be there. And we always want that message to be consistent. So not saying users cannot change it. They certainly can, but by default, they can't just click on some of these things and change them. So they could change the specificity of this particular modal and then add content to it. But all the rest of this, just by default, will be more difficult for them to change. So that's a hint that those are things we would like to remain consistent. So again, these are just quality of life things that I would normally think about and provide to our design team when creating components for our design system. So thank you very much for walking through this with me today. It's been a pleasure.